We will begin at 4 o'clock. We will begin at 4 o'clock itself. Professor Amalendu Jyotishi, other distinguished participants, my esteemed colleague Dr. Santosh Kumar, and distinguished participants on the online format. So let me introduce, this is the program that the Center for Budget Studies is organizing as a part of Asadika Amrit Mahotsav, supported by ICSSR. So today we have an eminent professor from Asim Premji University, Professor Amalendu Jyotishi, and he specializes in natural resources management and commons, agriculture and economic development, new institutional economics, and so forth. And his areas of interest includes issues relating to natural resources and institutions, and also innovation, entrepreneurship, information technology, businesses, and so forth. So he has also collaboration with international agencies like the Netherlands Organization of Sustainable Research, SIDA, World Bank, Oxfam, and also he has very excellent publications to credit, including the economic and political weekly. Today we are lucky enough to get Professor Amalendu with us, and he will be talking on the topic Understanding India Society through Semi-Feudal, Semi-Colonial lenses, on behalf of Center for Budget Studies, Cochin University of Science Studies, on my personal behalf and on all of us assembled, I extend you a warm welcome and also request you to deliver the lecture. Just as an introduction, I would like to share that this Center for Budget Studies is specializing on budget. We are actually offering a course called MSc Economics and Financial Technology, and most of the students are from that. Apart from that, we have students from the MA Applied Economics, and also the research scholars from the Department of Applied Economics. So some of the alumni of Applied Economics may also be joining with this program. Okay, let us begin. Professor.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Hari Kumar, for such a generous introduction. It was just interaction with Dr. Santosh that he suggested me to deliver a lecture, and at that point of time, I was not very clear about what is the topic that would interest the audience and what is that I should be speaking on. And on just that day, I was looking for a book which I had read earlier by my own teacher, Professor R.S. Rao. And fortunately, that day I received that particular book. It's called Towards Understanding Semi-Feudal, Semi-Colonial Society. And that triggered me to kind of discuss this particular topic. I also understand that there is a lot of there is a kind of generation gap. Essentially, we see when we look at the set of students with us, students from 60s, 70s, and 80s would appreciate or relate the term semi-feudal, semi-colonial kind of terminology, but this generation may be very different. So one part of the talk that I wish to bring in is that how in the contemporary world we can see this reinforcement, or how this idea of semi-feudal, semi-colonial society is kind of manifesting itself in the new form through technology, through information technology. So that is perhaps the kind of crux of my talk. That is what I will kind of take you through this next 40 minutes or so. So anywhere, if you have any particular kind of issue, you can stop me. Otherwise, I welcome questions afterwards. So I hope you are able to see my slides.
Okay, you can proceed.
Yes. So I don't have too many slides to speak about. These are essentially my own personal notes to help myself organize my thoughts. And I see some of the very brilliant scholars who are also part of this talk and who have much better engagement with this topic on understanding Indian society, particularly political economy of India, especially in agrarian context. So I understand that. So my humility and humble submission, and I will obviously look forward to their comments, but it's a quite a humbling experience to give this talk in front of them. So it is, maybe I will just keep my talk, keeping this new generation in mind, understanding that they may not have any idea behind what is semi-feudal, semi-colonial society, and give a little simpler explanation about these things, and set the context, and then go forward explaining in the contemporary situation. So this is a topic that has been kind of discussed and deliberated, particularly to understand the transition society. And transition society, different economists and historians put it in different phases. For example, some look at the transition society from the process of industrialization that happened in mid 19th century, around 1800 period, when large-scale mass production started happening, and it had impact on artisanal form of mode of production. And particularly India was one of the had major impact on the industrialized mode of production. And some put that as a kind of a form of transition that had happened, and the kind of impact that it had on the production system, the production relation in Indian society. Some other, like say Marx himself, tries to put the development of railway in India, particularly as one big form of transition, and he was quite he was betting more on that this with the expansion of Indian railway system, the mode of production and production relationship in India will change. But the lot of scholars, particularly numerous Indian economic scholars, particularly who worked on political economy dimensions, they looked at Indian society, its transition, essentially around the time of independence, when there are induced changes happening in agricultural sector, and numerous debates came around what is the path of transition of Indian agriculture. Some suggested it is capitalist form of transition that is happening with the inducement of inputs. The outputs are dramatically changing. And some termed it as it is still feudal in nature, because the landholders were not essentially the farmers or tillers themselves, and those who are owning the land were a different group from those who are tilling the land and producing. And the landowners per se themselves didn't have sufficient incentive to improvise or put input to the land or increase the productivity of the land, and their sole interest was to seek rent from the rental value from the land. So, so around agrarian changes, numerous discussions happened on what is the form of transition. And on this transition, there are number of discussions that happened. Some suggested that the transition is towards more capitalist growth. Some suggested that it still has a tremendous influence of feudal form of growth, which basically means that those who own the resources or wealth or the means of productions, their interest was to get a rental value out of, or rent seeking was the form of getting the returns. So, and which characterized the feudal characteristics of the society. So, and number of discussion and debates, particularly around availability of irrigation, that played an important role. So the evidence is data supported by data, and then analysis based on what is the nature of the society. They suggested that some suggested that it is a capitalist form of growth, some suggested that it is still a rent-seeking feudal form of growth. But irrigation did play an important role in terms of the kind of transition. So depending on where we put ourselves, it is the industrialization phase or the railway and its expansion in the colonial period, or the transitions in agriculture in terms of capital investment, particularly irrigation related investment. We try to understand Indian society from these different lenses, and numerous writing in early 50s, 60s, 70s, even in 80s, we find discussing about the nature of this transition. So why I am kind of, what is this semi-feudal and semi-colonial when we are saying? One part is the feudal part of it is we understand it from the rent-seeking behavior of the people who own the resources. The colonial society or the semi-colonial or the influence of colonial aspect is being discussed, particularly post-independent India, where we try to see that what is the nature of this capital. We go back to understand that how India was colonized, and it was 1757, but that is at the Battle of Plassey that we know that the East India Company took charge of the revenue collection from Bengal, and that transited them from a merchant to a merchant ruler. And from there, the expansion has happened. And by 1857, we had almost entire country which includes the current day Bangladesh, Pakistan, also was under the East India Company's rule. And by 1857, then this British Crown, which took over the administration of the country, right? So East India Company was established in 1600 with a charter, and they wanted to have a monopoly and monopsony rights monopoly rights in terms of getting a charter from the government, the then Crown of England, and try to establish a kind of a monopsony right by buying all the products that they wanted to trade in UK. But there's a few studies, particularly one by Dr. Shashi Shiv Ramakrishna. I understand he also gave a talk here. So his work shows that how this company was continuously under losses, and until they kind of got this rights of revenue collection in 1757 after Battle of Plassey. So the nature of capital itself is quite interesting to understand that from where and how the capital came and what kind of transition that happened, and which has where the capital is coming from, and that in some way defines the characteristics of it. That is where we, even post-independent India, we try to see that whether this capital that is coming is imperial in nature, and that is where the idea of colonial or semi-colonial society comes in. So when we try to explain this semi-feudal, semi-colonial society, essentially we try to look at whether rent-seeking behaviors are still an important part of this production, mode of production and production relation, and what is the nature of the capital and from where it is coming from. But why in Indian context it is so interesting to understand and characterize this for various reasons. And this I am drawing from this particular book that I showed by R.S. Rao. He explains the Indian society very, very interesting way, and in some places actually a lot more humorous way. So what makes the Indian society very different from other society? And there are numerous examples in several chapters in this book, and there are numerous examples that he has given to characterize India as a society of assimilation, where he argues that it is not about which ism is coming and which ism is replacing which one. It's rather it is a society where any new ism, any new technology can come in and can get assimilated. So numerous examples are being given, which we also experience in our life. The first example that is being taken is about Kolkata as a city, and Kolkata as a city also signifies in many more ways, because that was the first city to be invaded by British capital, from where the East India Company turned from merchant to merchant ruler in 1757. So the merchant capital did play an important role in transforming what changes that we saw later in Indian society. So that capital being induced in that particular place, what is the characteristics of that city, and which we give through an example that the mode of transportation, in fact, explains the modes of transportation in Kolkata. Kolkata was, of course, the first city in India, post-independent city in India, where we had these metro trains running. So the modern shuttle trains were existing in late 1980s and early 1990s. So that being a kind of hallmark of modernization, you look at that city's characteristics in terms of modes of transportation. You find the trams running there. You find different other private taxis running there. You also find hand-pulled rickshaw still running there. So in a transition society, when it transits from an older form of technology and mode of production to new form of it, the usual thinking that we have is that the newer one will replace the older one, and the older one becomes obsolete and becomes a part of museum, and maybe we'll see them in museum. But in a sense, the Kolkata's mode of transportation, if we see, it's almost like a living museum, where we see the hand-pulling rickshaws and shuttle trains all existing together in the city's mobility life. And nothing has replaced the other one. So each one has its own relevance, and it still continues to work. And that was one of the interesting example. I thought that it speaks about how this society assimilates varieties of forms and technology without displacing one, and each kind of coexisting with other. The similar examples are also identified, not necessarily in a larger macro picture, but also in our household, our regular behaviors. Say, for example, I still remember the kind of grinding machines that we use for grinding masalas. Spices are part of Indian life, and these masalas are to be ground to make our dishes and curries. And we have this something that is a machine called stone. Basically, two stones are being used for grinding the masalas. I don't know what it is to be called in English. There are different in different local languages. There are different names are there. In the Odisha, the place I come from, it is known as silputa, and that's an instrument of almost a Neolithic age. And people who grind dosa and dosa batters, that you would know that there is a kind of Stone Age, Neolithic age instruments being used. In many houses, you will find these coffee grinding machines, which are based on this mechanical age machines. You will also find the modern days, the mixies, which are being used for varieties of household grinding purpose. And at least in my memories, in my household at home, all these machines are being used and nothing has replaced the other one. And it may be a story of many older houses, particularly those who are agrarian in nature, those which are maybe still continues to be traditional in nature. You'll find that these things being used, and each one has its own relevance for certain kind of purpose. And that's true with even the kind of cooking instruments that, or energy that we use. And in agrarian households particularly, you find fuel wood being used to cow dung and other kinds of technology. We see coal as a technology being used, and also along with that, we see the gas stoves, the LPG gas stoves, the modern microwaves, and even in some houses they use solar cooker, etc. So what we see is that in that also that certain kinds of instruments being used for certain kind of purpose, and nothing is being obsolete, and each one of these have a particular type of use. These are some kind of very simple, finer example of the that characterize the society, that a society which doesn't want to replace the older technology and older things to have the and rely totally on the modern instruments. So, and the older instruments are not necessarily part of museum all the time. They are, you see them in practice in usage. Interestingly, I, along with my friend Sasi and a few other friends, we have been involved in a particular kind of interesting project called Buchanan's Journey. It's a person called Francis Buchanan who traveled from Madras through Mysore to Malabar in 1800, exactly in 1800, after Tipu Sultan was defeated. The Mysore state was annexed by East India Company, and he travels through this place, and he had written what is called Buchanan's Diary. There are 3 volumes of it, and quite vividly he explains about the places which includes part of Bangalore, Mysore, and many other places in Malabar region. So what we are doing through this project, Buchanan's Journey, is trying to visit some of these places 200 years later, and try to see what is what was then and what is now. And what has surprised us most often is not what changes have taken place, rather what is continuing. And numerous things which has been continuing, based on which we have made some documentary film. Sometimes we have made some small popular article that we have written, which includes different forms of iron smelting, calcium making, glass making, and coarse blanket making. The weavers, the technology remains same. So these are the things through our own eyes that we have seen also reinforces the characteristics of the society, that what is continuing becomes a lot more important, and nothing has been obsolete, and new technology has come in, but it has not replaced the old one. There's also one more important dimension about the Indian society also is the characteristics of property rights. To what extent things are private, and to what extent it is not private. And of course, we see the commons on which communities are dependent on, varieties of commons, marine, coastal, village commons, forest commons, water commons, etc. But apart from that, one also sees that this being manifested in numerous ways. And Rao particularly gives a very interesting example of it, that when you travel locally in train from one station to another, and sometimes you tend to travel without tickets. I don't know, this is not a situation now, I guess, but when you travel without tickets, and a lot of even small traders with their baskets of vegetables and other things used to travel in these trains, and quite often without tickets. So at that point of time, if the TT kind of penalizes you, the penalizing process need not necessarily always be in cash or penalty in terms of cash. Sometimes it can be in kind, and you can give your little vegetable to him, and the activities can be settled. A lot of it is also comes from how we position ourselves as a railway as a property. It's a kind of a shared property, and so long you are able to position yourself in that shared dimension, I think there is a larger acceptance around it. One interesting anecdote that comes out of it is in this particular article in the book that I read that came out was that there are a lot of these engines used to run on coal, and the coal also was used by the communities who are living in the sides of railway track. And the driver of that locomotive also had a shared value with them. And at one point of time, the driver felt that he may not have sufficient coal to go forward to the next station. And when he publicly kind of shared his concern, the communities also came up with a little bit of coal in their hand to give it to the driver so that he can drag his locomotive engine to the next possible destination. So it may sound humorous, it may sound funny, and it may sound from a private properties understanding perspective, it's very weird and weird form of relationship, but there is a shared relationship. But in a modern terminology, we may use corruption as a form, but there is a concern or sense of sharing is also a part of characteristics of this society. So that perhaps is something which makes the Indian society, or in general the Asiatic society, different from many other society which has evolved from this kind of a different regimes of property relations to where now private property has become the dominant form of property relationship, and which has given rise to efficient form of market and market as a structure which has evolved. Indian society that has evolved too, but that resides alongside varieties of other forms of relationship, and that makes this society a little different. So as I said, what has been researched and discussed so far. So when you come to this point of semi-feudal, semi-colonial society discussion and debate, it perhaps somewhere it stagnated in 1980s, and beyond that, scholars specifically did not take much interest to write more about it. Perhaps many felt that the transition has already been done, and the society has moved. The problems are the nature of the problems are now different, or what has been already being said by many of these researchers. There is nothing much new to add to this form. So the kind of debates that or discussion that was largely happening certainly was about the agrarian context and the mode of production. It was give an example from southern Indian side. So it was Sir Arthur Cotton, who played a very important role in building dams and providing irrigation, particularly in Godavari, Krishna, and a few other river deltas areas. In fact, Arthur Cotton is still revered as one of the revered by the community and people. I mean, if one goes to East Godavari districts particularly, will find hundreds of monuments of Arthur Cotton, and he is being worshipped. One of the reasons is that he provided irrigation to the region, and that kind of enhanced the productivity of the land there. And that numerous types of the relationship with the production system, and also the land revenue or the taxation system also changed. Why Arthur Cotton is revered also, he kind of played a dual role. One role was that he was not necessarily inclined towards only extracting more land taxes from the people. given that their productivity of land remains low. So what he felt that if with the increase in production, the burden on tax itself will be less and the realization of tax revenue will be higher, and which was proven to be correct, and the land revenue started increasing. But in certain parts of the country where this money supply itself was in deficit, there was not sufficient money in supply, and we found agencies coming in. That's where we saw the usherers or money lenders coming into play. And there has been number of discussion around that to say that how they played a role in terms of mobilizing the production relationship through the interlocking of the credit market. The credit market used to interlock in the time of adversity, when the production fails or something like that, through providing credit, but with a very high interest rate. And the gradual process of appropriation that happens or happened was through mortgaging of land and then through mortgaging of labor. So the credit first with the production of the output, and then later with the mortgaging of the land and the mortgaging of the labor. So the credit market interlinking or interlocking used to happen how by providing credit, you can buy the product back from them at a predetermined price. And once that fails, how you can appropriate the land. And once that fails, how you can appropriate the labor, where you make the owner of the land as the tiller of the land and provide a minimum wage to them. So this was the system of interlocking of market that was being discussed. People like Amit Bhaduri and others vividly discussed about the interlocking market system, which exhibited the characteristics of feudalism along with the colonial capital, with the money that is what here in this case. So from there, some amount of discussion on semi-feudal, semi-colonial society is also associated with the movements, particularly in the Eastern Ghats and Chotanagpur region. When the Naxal movement itself kind of was at peak, some of the thinkers did discuss about how important it is that the current characteristics of the society is semi-feudal and semi-colonial. The state itself plays the similar kind of role, and so that needs to be altered through the movement. So numerous Naxalite sympathizer or thinkers did talk about semi-feudal, semi-colonial society while arguing about the transition they wanted to see. And in fact, you will, apart from basic economics literature or the political economy literature, if you have to look at something to understand where the semi-feudal, semi-colonial society debate stands, you will find that in these discussions about these movements. But that's something like much in the past, right? So what we have seen is quite a dramatic change that has happened to Indian society. There are many phases to it, obviously. We can say that the Green Revolution technology itself had played some important role, of course, in pockets. Then in 1991, we had liberalization and followed by numerous liberalization policies, which made the movement of capital much easier and possibly changed the characteristics of production relationship. There was shift that was happening in terms of contribution to the GDP from agriculture being dominant, from there to services being dominant. But one of the major changes that started also around liberalization was what you call the computerization as a process. A lot of services we attempted to computerize it, Indian Railway being one of those. But it was in 2000 with the advent not only of computers, but this information technology, it has brought in dramatic changes and it has implications on Indian society. If today's rapid development of information technology and particularly Internet of Things, if we have to see, it has penetrated dramatically in Indian society. Even in a remote village, you will not be surprised to see people holding smartphones and being part of an information society in many different ways. How good that information is being used or what purpose it is being used is a different question and debate, but that is being seen. And what is playing any important role in this kind of transition? If we had to look at our day-to-day activity from our mobility, that we want to look at traveling, transportation, there are Ubers and Olas. If you are traveling to a different place and want to book a hotel or room, there are Oyo rooms, etc. If you want to order your food, there are Swiggy and Zomatos. If you want to retail, you want to buy your daily milk. There is a Big Basket or BB Deli in Bangalore that's quite popular and famous. You want to buy your groceries and retails, and there are Amazons and Flipkarts. You buy your even apparels and dresses. There are multiple of them, including Amazon, Flipkart, Mantra, etc. So all these things have become part of our life. And what is the kind of resources? What is that scarce resource on which they are these business models are being organized? And does it have any kind of semblance of a semi-feudal, semi-colonial characteristics? This is something needs to be pondered about. One important thing about this is obviously what is the most important resource that they are accumulating. And to me, one of the most important resources is information about us and about you that is being aggregated. And this information then being made used through a system of what you call the internet platform. And this through this platform, a technology or device that plays an important role connecting varieties of actors. And this has brought in numerous changes. One is this we see it as a consumer level at some point of time, and that we understand that we download a particular type of app and we make use of that app. But there are also a number of things that goes behind it. And those what is going behind it, what we know is that where this information is being stored. Is it stored in a kind of a private place, or is it being stored what you call today is the cloud computing? So the cloud that we are talking about, this cloud is not necessarily in the cloud. It is somewhere settling, somewhere sitting. And who are these major players in this? If you have to look at it, you find that there are 4 major global players. That includes Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and IBM, who kind of control the most part of this cloud services. So if somebody else, XYZ, has a platform in the cloud, it's highly likely that these clouds are sitting somewhere in one of those particular cloud service providers. So it is not only in the interface of application that we are using in our smartphone, but also the information that is being stored. In both the cases, what we are seeing is that the kind of a concentration that is happening. And in fact, the business models themselves would work better or more, would become more profitable only if the aggregation has a minimum limit, or if it has crossed a minimum limit. So the more the aggregation that happens, the better becomes the resource power of that particular platform. And has it made any kind of changes to the form of production relationship? I think there are numerous changes. Apart from information and information aggregation, the changes are also being seen the blurred difference between who is a laborer and who is an entrepreneur. So a Uber driver who has a car, whether he has rented it or he has bought it through credit market or directly given by the company through a certain kind of a EMI arrangement. In all this, we see that sometimes we confuse between whether this person is an entrepreneur or this person is a laborer. We have to sometimes look at the opportunity cost of this person to understand what happens. My own understanding, interacting with numerous Uber and Ola driver that very frequently that I use, and I find them that the alternatives available to them is very, very limited. And so it's very difficult to characterize them as entrepreneurs in this, rather as a source of earning their livelihood, more of a usage of labor, which they have to spend in a day, even more than 12 hours to earn their living. And that is something is kind of a debate that we can put whether these persons are actually laborer or are entrepreneur. And what is the role of the platform here? I'm sorry, maybe there is a lot of sound coming. I'll just close the window. Sorry, there's a rain and thundering that is happening. So the point that I was trying to say is that what is the role of this platform? And beyond a point where the innovation and investment that has happened, beyond that, it is the profitability of this particular organization is not anymore dependent on the investment part of it. Rather, it earns a certain degree of return based on what is the charge they make to the customer or the service provider. And that kind of relationship essentially drives us back to something like a rent seeking. So the platform becomes a source of rent, the information becomes a source of rent, the aggregation becomes a source of rent. And from there, the earning becomes a kind of a rent earning rather than the return on the investment part of it. So that has changed the kind of the behavior of the capitalist, the way that we see in a manufacturing setup vis-a-vis the platform-based setup. So this has given rise to numerous questions to how to understand this rent-seeking behavior in the gig economy. What is the nature of capital? From where this money is coming from? Who is funding this? And how is it working? In numerous cases, you would find that the trail of the money is not necessarily domestic capital, and more often it is joint venture or provision by certain countries which are wealthy. So whether the form of capital has any dimension of imperial capital or imperial capital, so would it have any semblance with the what we had seen the nature of capital in a colonial society? So these are some of the questions need to be asked and need to be reflected on. And with this, what kind of what is the status of labor in this particular platform-based economy? Those whom we call the service provider or delivery boys, what kind of role do they play in this this kind of a platform-based economy? And in the process of accumulation, what is being accumulated? Apart from money, what is that we are seeing as a process of accumulation happening? So I think this gives rise to, I have a sense that it gives rise to a form which can be explained through the understanding of a semi-feudal and semi-colonial society. So would we say Indian society has kind of transited from a feudal society to a capitalist society, or it still continues to have the semblance of feudalism and colonialism, which has reinforced itself in a much different way in this modern internet-based information technology-based society. So with that, I will stop my talk, and I will appreciate, happy to have some questions or some discussion around this. It was quite a preliminary thought, and I hope it made sense for this particular talk, the series that you have organized. Many thanks for inviting me and allowing me to give a talk to this august audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. It's a very excellent talk. Especially it is very interesting to me because right from my PhD onwards, I was looking at this semi-feudal system, especially going through the literature of Krishna Bharadwaj, then Amit Badri, Ashok Rudra, a lot of Pranab Budan. So I used to read all this. So very nice to hear that you have taken the same idea to this present context, and you try to use this concept to view the modern Indian economy and what Indian economy is shaping, whether to call it as a semi-feudal or not. And when you concluded your talk, I was just thinking about you mentioned what is the status of labor. Now, if we compare the status of labor, we have to accept the fact that it remains the same. It remains the same. So whether to call it as a colonial, as a semi-colonial, or a semi-feudal, it is very interesting to hear your arguments, even though you told that this is your preliminary talk. Just one point I would like to know, what is the title of that book you have showed? I didn't see that correctly.
It's called Towards Understanding Semi-Feudal Semi-Colonial Society. It was by my teacher R.S. Rao in Sambalpur University in Odisha. It's a set of lectures that he had written by some obscure publisher. So I managed to get this book from his son, who is a professor at University of Hyderabad, Vijay. So I managed to get another copy from him.
Is it Oxford, India, or Oxford abroad?
Sorry, I think I lost you in between sometime, or you lost me.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much. And now it is open to discussion.